Picture this. A woman stands alone on a wooden platform in the middle of nowhere. Dust swirls around the hem of her only good dress. The train that brought her has already vanished down the tracks, leaving nothing but silence and the smell of coal smoke fading in the dry wind. She clutches a letter in one hand, a letter filled with promises from a man she has never met. A man who was supposed to be here, but the platform is empty. The town behind her looks half dead, and the sun is beginning to sink toward the horizon. She has no money to go back. She has no one waiting for her anywhere else in the world. She is completely and utterly alone. Now, before I tell you what happens next, I want to know, where are you watching this from today? Drop your location in the comments and send some love to everyone else watching. I appreciate every single one of you. Let me know you're here. Now, what this young woman doesn't know, what she cannot possibly see through the dust and the fading light, is that someone is watching her. A lone figure on horseback, stopped on the ridge above the town, staring down at her with eyes full of something complicated. Something between duty and dread. He wasn't supposed to be here either. This is a story about two broken people, an empty promise, and the kind of love that doesn't come easy. Stay with me until the end, because the final twist is something you will not see coming. Her name was Clara Winslow, and she had read the letter so many times that the creases in the paper had turned soft as cloth. She could recite every word from memory, but still she unfolded it again, standing there on that empty platform in Clearwater, Wyoming, as if the words might have changed since the last time she looked. "Dear Miss Winslow," it began, "I am a man of property and honest work. I own a cattle ranch outside of Clearwater, 240 acres of good grazing land with a house, a barn, and a creek that runs year-round. I am looking for a wife, not out of loneliness, though I confess there is that, but because I believe a home is not a home without a partner in it. If you are willing, I will send fare for the train. I will meet you at the station on the 14th of September. I give you my word." The letter was signed Thomas Hale. Clara had answered 6 advertisements in the matrimonial columns of the Eastern papers. Thomas Hale was the only one who wrote back with anything that felt real. His words were plain but careful. He didn't boast about his wealth or promise her a life of leisure. He described the land, the work, the silence of the evenings. He told her the winters were hard and the nearest town was small. He told her the truth, or what she believed was the truth, and that was more than anyone else had given her in a long time. Clara was 26 years old. In the world she came from, that made her nearly a lost cause. She had spent 8 years working in a textile mill in Lowell, Massachusetts, breathing cotton dust 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Her father had died when she was 15. Her mother had followed 3 years later, taken by the same cough that plagued half the mill workers. Clara had no siblings, no inheritance, no prospects. The mill was killing her slowly, and she knew it. So when Thomas Hale's letter arrived with a train ticket folded inside, Clara made her decision in less than an hour. She packed her single trunk, gave notice at the mill, and walked away from the only life she had ever known. She did not look back. There was nothing behind her worth seeing. The journey west took 11 days. 11 days of rattling coaches, soot-blackened windows, and stations that grew smaller and farther apart as the landscape opened up into something Clara had never imagined. She had read about the West, of course. Everyone had. But reading about the vast emptiness of the plains and actually watching them roll past, mile after mile after mile, with nothing but grass and sky, was something else entirely. It made her feel both terrified and strangely free. She arrived in Clearwater on the 14th of September, exactly as planned. The station was barely a station at all. A wooden platform, a small shed that served as a ticket office, and a hitching post with no horses tied to it. The town itself sat about a quarter-mile down a dirt road. Clara could see a cluster of buildings, maybe 15 or 20, including what looked like a general store, a saloon, and a church with a crooked steeple. Smoke rose from a few chimneys. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. But there was no one on the platform. Clara checked the letter again. The 14th. Clearwater, Wyoming. She was in the right place at the right time. She set her trunk down and waited. An hour passed. Then two. The ticket office closed. The man who ran it, a thin fellow with spectacles and a nervous manner, told her he didn't know any Thomas Hale. He suggested she try the saloon and ask there, then locked his door and walked away without offering to help with her trunk. Clara did not go to the saloon. A woman alone walking into a saloon in a town she didn't know was not something she was prepared to do. Not yet. Instead, she sat on her trunk and watched the road, waiting for a man she had never seen, clinging to a promise made on paper by a stranger. The shadows grew long, the air cooled, and Clara began to understand, with a slow, sickening certainty, that Thomas Hale was not coming. She did not cry. She had stopped crying years ago, somewhere between her mother's funeral and her 1000th day in the mill. Crying required hope, and hope was something Clara had learned to ration carefully. But she felt the weight of her situation settling onto her shoulders like a physical thing, heavy and cold. She was stranded, alone, in a place where no one knew her name. That was when she heard the horse. The rider came from the north, not from the direction of town. Clara heard the hoofbeats before she saw him, a slow, steady rhythm that grew louder as the horse crested the low ridge above the station. For a moment, horse and rider were silhouetted against the darkening sky, perfectly still, like a painting she had once seen in a shop window back in Lowell. Then the horse began to descend, picking its way carefully down the slope, and Clara got her first real look at the man. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed. Even sitting in the saddle, she could tell he was well over 6 feet. He wore a long duster coat, dark with trail dust, and a hat pulled low over his eyes. His horse was a big sorrel mare, well-muscled but clearly tired, as though they had been riding a long time. A rifle sat in a scabbard on the saddle, and a coil of rope hung from the horn. He did not look like a rancher coming to meet his bride. He looked like a man who had been sleeping on the ground and eating out of a tin cup for weeks. Clara's hand tightened on the letter. She stood up from her trunk, straightening her dress, trying to look composed despite the dust on her hem and the loose strands of hair the wind had pulled free from her pins. The rider pulled up about 20 feet from the platform. He sat there for a moment, looking at her. His face was weathered, tanned dark by the sun, with a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in several days. His eyes were a pale, startling blue, and they studied her with an expression Clara couldn't read. It wasn't hostile exactly, but it wasn't welcoming either. "You Clara Winslow?" he asked. His voice was low and rough, like he wasn't used to talking. Clara's heart jumped. "I am. Are you Thomas Hale?" Something crossed his face. A shadow, a flicker of something painful. He looked away for a moment, out toward the empty plains, then back at her. "No, ma'am. I'm not Thomas Hale. My name is Caleb Hale. Thomas was my brother." Clara caught the word immediately, and it hit her like a stone dropped into still water. What do you mean, was?" she asked, though some part of her already knew. Caleb dismounted slowly. He moved like a man carrying something heavy, not on his back but inside him. He looped the reins around the hitching post and took off his hat, holding it in both hands. His hair was dark, matted from the hat, and there was a scar running along his left temple, thin and white. "Thomas died 3 weeks ago," Caleb said. "Thrown from a horse. Broke his neck. It was quick, if that's any comfort." Clara stared at him. The words made sense individually, but together they formed a sentence that her mind refused to accept. The man who had written to her, who had sent for her, who had promised to meet her at this very station, was dead. Had been dead for 3 weeks. She had been on a train for 11 days, traveling toward a man who was already in the ground. 3 weeks, she whispered. Why didn't anyone send word? Why didn't someone stop me from coming? Caleb's jaw tightened. I didn't know about you until 2 days ago. I've been up in Montana working cattle drives. I don't stay in one place long. When I finally came back to settle Thomas's affairs, I found your letters in his desk. The last one said you were coming on the 14th. I rode hard to get here. He paused, looking at her trunk, then at her. "I'm sorry, Miss Winslow. I truly am." Clara felt the ground shifting beneath her, not literally but in every other way that mattered. Every plan, every fragile hope she had built over the past 2 months, collapsed in the space of a single conversation. She had burned her bridges. She had left her job, her room, her city. She had nothing to go back to and now nothing to go forward to either. "What about the ranch?" she heard herself asking. Thomas wrote about a ranch. 240 acres. Caleb put his hat back on. "The ranch is real enough, but it's in bad shape." Thomas he wasn't always the man his letters made him out to be. He had debts. The herd's been scattered. Half the fences are down. The bank in Cheyenne has been sniffing around. Clara absorbed this information with the same numb calm she had learned in the mill, the ability to receive bad news and keep standing. "So what happens now?" Caleb studied her for a long moment. "That depends on you, I suppose. I can give you money for a return ticket. It's not much, but it'll get you back east. Back east. Back to the mill, the dust, the coughing, the slow death of everything she was." Clara looked down at the letter in her hand, at the promises of a dead man written in careful ink. Then she looked at the town, at the empty road, at the vast sky turning purple and orange above them. "And if I don't want to go back?" she said. Caleb's expression changed. Just slightly, a crack in the stone wall of his face. "Then I don't rightly know what to tell you, ma'am. My name is Clara," she said, "and I didn't come 2,000 miles to turn around." Caleb took her to the ranch that evening. They rode in his wagon, which he'd left at the livery stable in town, with her trunk in the back and his horse tied behind. He didn't talk much during the ride. Clara was beginning to understand that Caleb Hale was not a man who used words when silence would do. The ranch was 4 miles outside of Clearwater, down a road that turned from dirt to barely visible ruts through tall grass. When they finally arrived, Clara understood what Caleb had meant about the place being in bad shape. The house was a 2-room cabin, solidly built but neglected. One window was cracked. The porch steps sagged. Weeds had overtaken what might have once been a garden near the front door. The barn was larger than the house, but its roof had a visible hole on one side, and the corral fence was broken in 3 places. A windmill stood nearby, its blades turning slowly in the evening breeze, making a lonesome creaking sound that seemed to underscore the emptiness of the place. But beyond the buildings, Clara saw the land. And the land was beautiful. Rolling hills covered in golden grass stretched away in every direction, broken by stands of cottonwood trees along a creek bed that wound through the property like a silver ribbon. The sky above was enormous, bigger than any sky Clara had ever seen, and it was filled with the last colors of sunset, deep reds and golds that lit the clouds from below. "Thomas bought this place 5 years ago," Caleb said, pulling the wagon up to the house. "He had a vision for it. Always had visions, Thomas. Big plans." He paused. "Wasn't always great at following through." Clara climbed down from the wagon and walked to the porch. She pushed the door open and looked inside. The cabin was rough but functional. A cast-iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, a bed frame with a thin mattress, shelves with a few tins and jars. Dust covered everything. A man's coat hung on a hook by the door, and Clara realized with a start that it must have been Thomas's. The dead man's coat, still hanging as if he might walk in and put it on. "I've been sleeping in the barn," Caleb said from behind her. "The house is yours if you want it, for now at least, until you figure out what you want to do." Clara turned to face him. "What are you going to do?" Caleb leaned against the porch railing, which groaned under his weight. "Fix the fences. Round up what's left of the herd. Try to get this place into shape so it can be sold or kept or whatever needs to happen. Thomas didn't leave a will. As his only living kin, the place falls to me. But I'm not a settling down kind of man, Miss Clara. I never have been. You don't want the ranch? I don't want anything that ties me to one place." He said it flatly, without emotion, like he was stating a fact about the weather. Clara spent her first night in the cabin alone. She cleaned what she could by lamplight, swept the floor, wiped down the table, aired out the bedding. She found Thomas's letters to her, drafts of them, in a drawer. He had written and rewritten, crossing out words, trying different phrases. Seeing his handwriting, knowing the hand that wrote it was now still and cold in the ground, filled her with a grief she hadn't expected. She hadn't loved Thomas Hale. She had never met him. But she had loved the possibility of him, the future he represented, and grieving a possibility was a strange and hollow kind of sorrow. Over the following days, Clara and Caleb fell into an uneasy routine. He worked outside from dawn until dark, repairing fences, clearing brush, tending to the handful of cattle that still roamed the property. Clara took charge of the house. She cleaned, organized, repaired what she could. She started a garden, turning the soil with a rusted spade she found in the barn. She cooked meals from the meager supplies available, beans and cornbread and salt pork, and left a plate for Caleb on the porch because he refused to eat inside. They barely spoke. Caleb seemed to actively avoid conversation, and when Clara tried to engage him, he responded with short answers and looked away. He was polite but distant, like a man standing on the other side of a river, close enough to see but too far to reach. But Clara noticed things. She noticed that he checked the locks on the cabin door every night before going to the barn. She noticed that he split extra firewood and stacked it by the porch without being asked. She noticed that when the creek ran low after a week without rain, he carried water in buckets to her garden, setting them by the rows she'd planted, never mentioning it. He was a man who could not say kind things but could not stop doing them. On the 7th day, Clara walked out to the corral where Caleb was working and said, "I'm not going back east." Caleb didn't look up from the fence post he was setting. "That's your choice. I want to stay. I want to work this ranch." Now he looked up. "You don't know anything about ranching." "I know about work," Clara said evenly. "I worked 12-hour days in a cotton mill for 8 years. I can learn the rest." Caleb stared at her, and for the first time, Clara saw something shift behind those pale blue eyes. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement of one stubborn soul recognizing another. "All right," he said, and went back to his fence post. 2 weeks after Clara's arrival, the trouble started. Came in the form of a man named Virgil Dent. He rode onto the property one afternoon with 2 others, men who looked like they'd been hired for their size and their willingness to do unpleasant things. Dent himself was a lean, sharp-featured man in a black coat, with a thin smile that never reached his eyes. He dismounted without being invited and walked up to the porch where Clara was hanging laundry. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm looking for the owner of this property." "The owner is dead," Clara said. She didn't like the way his eyes moved over her, cataloging her like inventory. "Thomas Hale." "Yes, I'm aware. Tragic business. I represent the Territorial Land and Cattle Company. Thomas owed us a considerable sum. We've come to discuss repayment." He pulled a folded document from his coat. "Or, failing that, to discuss the transfer of the property." Clara took the document and looked at it. It was a contract of some kind, filled with legal language she couldn't fully parse, but the numbers were clear enough. According to this paper, Thomas Hale owed the Territorial Land and Cattle Company $370. Fortune. More than Clara could earn in 2 years at the mill. "I'll need to show this to Caleb Hale," she said. "Thomas's brother. He's the legal heir." Dent's smile thinned. "Ah, yes, the drifter brother. I've heard about him. Let me be direct, ma'am. This debt is real and it's overdue. If it's not settled within 30 days, we'll be forced to take possession of the property. That's the law." He mounted his horse, tipped his hat again, and rode off with his men. Clara watched them go, her hands gripping the laundry line until her knuckles turned white. When Caleb came in from the range that evening, she showed him the document. He read it slowly, his face darkening with every line. "This is a fraud," he said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because I know Virgil Dent. He's been buying up land all over this territory for years. He uses tricks, forged contracts, fake debts, intimidation. He tried this with a rancher up in Sheridan last year. The man resisted, and his barn burned down. A month later, Dent owned the property. Clara felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. What do we do? Caleb set the document down on the table and looked at her. For the first time, his expression wasn't guarded. It was angry, and beneath the anger, Clara saw something else. Determination. We fight, he said. The next 3 weeks were the hardest Clara had ever lived through, and she had lived through plenty. Caleb rode to Clearwater to find a lawyer and discovered that the only attorney in town was already on retainer with the Territorial Land and Cattle Company. He rode to Cheyenne, 2 days each way, and found a lawyer willing to look at the contract. The lawyer confirmed what Caleb suspected. The document was likely forged, but proving it would take time and money they didn't have. Meanwhile, Dent's men began their campaign of pressure. Fences that Caleb had repaired were torn down overnight. Cattle went missing. One morning, Clara found a dead coyote hung from the porch railing, a message that needed no translation. Clara was afraid. She would have been a fool not to be. But fear was something she had learned to carry without letting it control her. In the mill, the looms could take your fingers off if you lost focus for a second. Fear was a constant companion there, and Clara had learned to work alongside it, to acknowledge its presence without obeying its commands. She started riding. Caleb taught her, grudgingly at first, then with growing respect as she took to it with the same stubborn competence she brought to everything. She learned to saddle a horse, to ride at a trot and then a canter, to read the land for signs of trespass. She rode the fence lines every morning while Caleb worked the cattle, and she carried a rifle across her saddle, though she had never fired one. One evening, sitting on the porch after a long day, Caleb spoke more than he had in the entire time she'd known him. Thomas wasn't perfect, he said, staring out at the darkening sky. We didn't always get along. He was the dreamer. I was the one who left. After our parents died, Thomas wanted to build something. I wanted to disappear. I rode cattle drives, hired on as a ranch hand, drifted from territory to territory. I told myself I was free, but I think maybe I was just running. Clara sat beside him, close but not touching. Running from what? From being needed, he said. From owing anything to anyone. From the chance that I might care about something and lose it. He paused. Like I lost Thomas. Clara didn't say anything. She understood that kind of pain. She understood the temptation to close yourself off, to build walls so high that nothing could hurt you, and the terrible discovery that those same walls kept out everything worth having. You're not running now, she said softly. Caleb looked at her. In the lamplight from the cabin window, his eyes were no longer cold. They were searching, uncertain, and impossibly vulnerable. No, he said. I guess I'm not. The 30th day arrived with a sunrise the color of blood. Clara woke before dawn and found Caleb already outside, standing by the corral with his rifle in his hands, watching the road. He had not slept. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the dark circles under his eyes. They'll come today, he said. Clara went inside and loaded the second rifle, the one Caleb had taught her to use during the past 2 weeks. Her hands were steady. She had fired at fence posts and tin cans until she could hit a target at 50 yards. She wasn't a marksman, but she was competent, and competence was all she had ever needed. They ate breakfast in silence. Biscuits and coffee the same as every morning. But Clara noticed that Caleb's hand shook slightly as he lifted his cup, and she realized that the bravest people were not those who felt no fear but those who felt it fully and stood their ground anyway. Dent arrived at mid-morning. He brought 6 men this time, all armed, riding in a loose formation that suggested they expected trouble. Dent himself rode at the front, wearing his black coat and that thin, empty smile. He stopped his horse at the edge of the property and called out, 30 days, Mr. Hale. Time's up. You can hand over the deed or we can take it. Either way, this land belongs to the Territorial Land and Cattle Company by sundown. Caleb stood on the porch, his rifle held casually but visibly. Clara stood beside him. Between them, they presented a picture that gave Dent pause. 2 people who looked like they had nothing left to lose. The debt is forged and you know it, Caleb called back. I've got a lawyer in Cheyenne who'll testify to that in front of a territorial judge. You want to press this, Dent, go ahead. But you'll do it in a courtroom, not on my land. Dent's smile flickered. A lawyer in Cheyenne. That's a long way off. A lot can happen before a judge gets involved. Yes, Caleb said. It can. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Clara felt the weight of it pressing against her chest. She counted the men behind Dent. 6 plus Dent himself. 7 against 2. The math was bad. But then something happened that neither Clara nor Caleb had expected. From behind them, from the direction of town, came the sound of horses. Clara turned and saw riders approaching, not in a threatening formation but in the loose, casual way of men who knew where they were going and why. She counted them as they drew closer. 4, 5, 8, 12. 12 riders, and at the front was the thin man with spectacles from the train station, though now he sat a horse with surprising ease and carried a shotgun across his pommel. Behind him came the owner of the general store, the blacksmith, 2 ranchers Clara had met briefly in town, and half a dozen other men and women she recognized from Clearwater. They rode up and spread out along the fence line, forming a barrier between Dent's men and the ranch. The man with spectacles, whose name was Harold Finch, nudged his horse forward. "Morning, Virgil," he said pleasantly. "Heard you were planning to visit the Hale place today. Thought we'd come along and make sure everything was done proper and legal." Dent's face went rigid. "This is a private matter." "No, sir, it isn't," Harold said. "This is a community matter. The Hale Ranch is part of Clearwater, and Clearwater looks after its own. We've seen what you've done in other towns, Dent. We've seen the burned barns and the forged papers and the families run off their land. It's not happening here." Clara watched Dent calculate. She could see it in his eyes, the cold arithmetic of a man weighing force against resistance, profit against risk. He looked at the townspeople, at their weapons, at the resolve on their faces. He looked at Caleb standing firm on the porch. He looked at Clara with a rifle she was clearly prepared to use. "This isn't over," Dent said. "Yes, it is," Caleb replied. Dent stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned his horse and rode away. His men followed. They disappeared over the ridge without looking back, and the sound of their hoofbeats faded into the vastness of the plains until there was nothing left but wind and silence. Clara realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out slowly, and with it came a trembling she had been suppressing all morning. Her knees felt weak. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in her hands. Caleb turned to her. His face was still guarded, still cautious, but his eyes were bright, and the ghost of a smile played at the corner of his mouth. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm all right," she said, and she was. Harold Finch dismounted and walked up to the porch. He shook Caleb's hand, then turned to Clara with a sheepish expression. "I owe you an apology, ma'am. The day you arrived, I wasn't very hospitable. I should have helped you. I should have done better." Clara shook his hand. "You're here now," she said. "That's what matters." The townspeople stayed for an hour, checking the property, offering supplies, making promises of help with the spring roundup. When they finally left, the ranch felt different. Not just protected but connected. Part of something larger than itself. Spring came to Clearwater like a slow exhalation. The snow on the distant mountains began to recede. The creek swelled with meltwater, running clear and cold through the property. Clara's garden, which she had tended through the winter with obsessive care, began to show green shoots pushing through the dark soil. Life was returning not just to the land, but to everything. Caleb stayed. That was the thing Clara hadn't dared to hope for, the thing she hadn't allowed herself to want. But he stayed. Day after day, week after week, he was there, mending fences, breaking horses, building a new room onto the cabin because, as he put it, the place needed more space, though he didn't say for what. They worked side by side in a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Clara handled the house, the garden, the chickens she had purchased from a farm outside town. Caleb managed the cattle, which had grown from the scattered dozen Thomas had left to a respectable herd of 40, with help from neighboring ranchers who offered fair prices on stock. The ranch was still struggling, still fragile, but it was alive. It was growing, and so were they. The change between them happened so gradually that Clara couldn't point to a single moment when it began. It was built from 1,000 small things. The way Caleb started eating dinner inside instead of on the porch. The way he brought her wildflowers from the creek bank without comment, leaving them in a jar on the table as if they'd appeared there by magic. The way he said her name, Clara, softer each time, as if the word itself was becoming something precious to him. Clara found herself watching him when he didn't know she was looking. She watched his hands as he worked, strong and scarred and impossibly gentle when he handled a newborn calf or adjusted the bridle on a skittish horse. She watched his face when he stood at the edge of the property in the evenings, looking out at the land with an expression that had shifted from restlessness to something quieter, something that looked like belonging. One evening in late April, they sat together on the porch as they often did, watching the last light fade from the sky. The air was warm and smelled of sage and grass and the clean, mineral scent of the creek. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark was singing. "I've been thinking," Caleb said. "That's dangerous," Clara replied, and he actually laughed. It was a rare sound, rough and unpracticed, and it made her heart ache in the best possible way. "I've been thinking about what Thomas wanted," he continued. "When he placed that advertisement, when he wrote to you, he wanted a partner, someone to build a life with. He wanted this place to be a home." Clara waited, her hands folded in her lap. Caleb turned to look at her. His blue eyes were steady, but she could see the fear in them, the old fear of being needed, of caring about something enough to lose it. He was fighting that fear. She could see him fighting it, the way she had seen him fight everything else, with quiet, stubborn courage. "I'm not Thomas," he said. "I'm not the man who wrote those letters. I'm not eloquent, and I'm not easy to live with. I've spent my whole life running from things, and I'm probably going to struggle with that every day for the rest of my life. But Clara..." He paused, and she watched him gather himself like a man stepping off a cliff. "I don't want to run anymore. Not from this place. Not from you." Clara looked at him. She thought about the mill, the dust, the endless mechanical thunder of the looms. She thought about the train ride west, the vast empty plains rolling past the window, the terror and the freedom of moving towards something unknown. She thought about standing on that platform, clutching a dead man's letter, completely alone in the world. And she thought about how the best things in her life had never been the things she planned for. They were the things that happened when every plan fell apart and she was left with nothing but herself and the choice to keep going. "I didn't come here for you," she said. "I came for a man I never met, to a place I'd never seen, with nothing but a letter and a hope. And everything I expected was wrong. The man was dead. The ranch was falling apart. The whole thing was a disaster." She paused. "But I stayed. And I would stay again. I would stay 100 times. She reached out and took his hand. It was rough and warm, and it closed around hers with a gentleness that undid something deep inside her. Some knot of loneliness and self-reliance that she had carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. "You're not Thomas," she said. "And I'm glad. Because Thomas was a dream on paper. You're real. You're here. And that's worth more than any letter ever written." They were married 3 weeks later in the Clearwater church with the crooked steeple. Harold Finch stood as witness. The whole town came. Clara wore her only good dress, the same one she'd worn on the platform the day she arrived, and Caleb wore a clean shirt and a tie that he kept pulling at uncomfortably until Clara reached up and straightened it for him. And the look on his face when she did made every woman in the church reach for her handkerchief. After the ceremony, they rode back to the ranch in the wagon, just as they had the first night. But this time Caleb talked. He talked about the plans he had for the place, the new fencing, the cattle breeds he wanted to try, the barn roof that needed patching before winter. He talked about the future as if it were something real, something solid, something worth investing in. And Clara listened, watching the golden grass roll past, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the steady presence of the man beside her. When they arrived at the ranch, Clara stopped at the gate and looked at the property. The cabin with its new room, the mended fences, the garden in full bloom, the herd grazing peacefully in the distance, the creek catching the last of the sunlight. It wasn't what she had imagined when she boarded that train in Lowell. It wasn't what Thomas Hale had promised in his letters. It was better. It was real. It was earned with sweat and stubbornness and the terrifying willingness to stay when everything in the world was telling you to run. "Welcome home," Caleb said. And Clara smiled, because for the first time in her life, she knew exactly what those words meant. And there it is. A woman who lost everything found something she never expected. A man who spent his life running finally found a reason to stand still. And a ranch that was falling apart became the foundation of something unbreakable. Sometimes the life you plan for isn't the life you're meant to live. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a broken promise on an empty train platform. If the story moved you, if you felt something in your chest during that final scene, then do me a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. And leave a comment telling me, what would you have done if you were Clara? Would you have stayed? Or would you have taken that return ticket? I read every single comment, and I cannot wait to hear what you think. Until next time, keep your heart open and your spirit wild. I'll see you in the next story.